Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started relatively shortly. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein, and welcome to the 33rd installment of my weekly virtual office hours. People continue to say that they really appreciate these weekly live stream addresses from their mayor. And I'll continue to do them through shelter in place and possibly even longer. The Facebook live stream allows me to give you updates on what's happening, answer some of your questions, of course, provide some words of encouragement. So thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during extraordinary times. I hope that everyone is doing well, staying healthy, staying sane, and hopefully staying warm. It's getting a little cold out there on my morning run. Please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. The days are getting much shorter right now, and so that also affects people as far as you know um, how they feel about how much sunlight they get, and hopefully you can get a chance to take a walk. Get outside of the house if you can. These are difficult times for many people, but that a little bit of exercise, a little bit of not staying in completely indoors all the time does really help before and taking advantage of that before the rains start, which will probably be within the next few weeks. So we'll start seeing some rain, looking at the long-term forecast. Keep following the county health orders. Right now we're in the orange tier, which allows us to have indoor dining and larger numbers of crowds, both indoors and outdoors. That being said, we are just barely in the orange tier. So if you're looking at kind of the trends, we made it from the purple to the red to the orange tier, but we're not that far from, if there's a surge in COVID cases, of going back into the red tier. So, and which will then, of course, cause a certain amount of shutdown from a countywide standpoint. You know, do what you need to do, whatever you can, to stop the spread of the virus. Continue to wash your hands, don't touch your face, reduce the number of people you come in contact with, and of course, you know, wear your mask. That really helps. It's mandatory. And if you, as I've said before, if you need a face covering, if you need a mask, definitely reach out to me. Uh, Most people have them now, although I do see, a lot of people still using disposable face masks, and the more the and I still see, disposed of face masks and gloves in my morning walks and run. But from that standpoint, it's like a reusable one is just as good to a large degree. We are not out of the woods yet. You can be a carrier. You can see someone that is also a carrier that doesn't show any symptoms. So please be you know, please be as safe as possible. Take care of yourself and prevent prevent you from spreading as well as preventing other people from spreading to you by wearing a mask. And it's critical. It's important at the end of the day in order to maintain and continue moving forward with the opening up that we're currently enjoying. So, right now we are 228 days since the March 16th county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. And since that declaration, a lot has happened. A lot happens every day, it seems like. I have daily press conferences to watch, seminars to attend, conference calls to confer and advocate on your behalf. But we are, making progress. We are starting to see a recovery and things, opening up. That being said, it is flu season. Definitely go get your flu shot if you can. Definitely go see whatever you can do as far as making sure that you're protected from the flu, and hopefully we'll have a COVID-19 vaccine sometime relatively soon. And that to me is critical from a certain standpoint. And I'll be talking a little bit about that later. But from my standpoint, I'm trying to do whatever I can for our city to make sure that residents are safe as well as we're getting the appropriate regional representation. So on that note, let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, the state, the county, and of course the city level over the last week or so. So last week, I think Governor Newsom only had one press conference, but he spent a lot of time talking about potential COVID vaccines at that. So Moderna and Pfizer both have, let's say, stretch goals of a vaccine that'll be ready in November or December. And Governor Newsom basically tried to set some expectations on how available that vaccine will be. We're all looking forward to, being safe and hopefully not stopping that spread of COVID-19. But from a estimation standpoint, there will only be 45 million doses in November, December for the whole country before the end of the year. And what's also important is it's 2 doses are going to be needed to be effective. So that immediately, divides those number of doses in half. So that's 22 million doses approximately. And then we'll probably from a state of California standpoint get about 1.5 to 2 million doses that are available. And those will be prioritized for healthcare workers and first responders. And the governor basically said that there's going to be a task force to review all FDA-approved vaccines, and and from that standpoint, it's setting those, it's giving the appropriate information to the federal government as well as working with other West Coast states. And we'll be talking about a press conference that the governor had this week on that exact fact. And last week, the spread was seen to be as relatively stable. This week we've seen an uptick in numbers, a slight uptick. The other focus, of course, is fire season. We're not done with fire season yet, although we would definitely like to see some of those first rains to help prevent that. But it's still very much a high risk time as far as fires are concerned. And the governor last week talked about updates to how many fires are currently outstanding. We're our between CAL FIRE and local support and actually support from outside of the state, things are looking better, but we're not out of the woods as far as the fire is concerned. Fire season is concerned yet. So hopefully, the cooler weather Hopefully the rain season is getting some rains will actually help that out. And then as far as this week, on Monday afternoon, Santa Clara County uh, had a press conference, and it was mainly all around voting. You know, and this is an important thing that you know having a safe election at our polling stations around the county is really important. And that was the big message is it will be safe to vote. So voting stations around the county, and right now you can, if you want to vote in person, get a replacement ballot, register to vote, you can go to the county register. But tomorrow, October 31st, Halloween, uh, there'll be about 100 different polling voting centers opened up around the county. And so, um, and this was kind of an update from the county registrar, the DA, the county supervisors talking about, at least we haven't seen any fake ballot boxes within the county. And, it was just kind of getting that word out that we haven't seen any voter suppression or any intimidation, but it was making sure that we are wary about that. We are, watching to make sure that that isn't an issue. And so it was actually good from that standpoint. It was to hear from the county registrar to make sure that we will be we're ready to and currently actively looking at all the ballots that are currently being dropped off. We're ready to deal with any mail-in ballots up to 17 days after election day. So as long as they're postmarked by November 3rd, they're still valid from a mailing standpoint. And so and then of course, we are ready to certify the elections as we always do, 30 days after November 3rd. So the county registrar ultimately is ready to do their job, and part of that meeting, actually, our Sunnyvale public safety chief, Van No, was actually at that to talk about law enforcement. He is currently the chair of the police chiefs association, and so they're ready. Law enforcement's ready to work with the county district attorney's office if they see any signs of electioneering, campaigning for a candidate or ballot measure at the polling sites. If there's any intimidation, our public safety is ready to respond around the county. So that was good from that standpoint, and it was good to see the chief, talking and representing our city as well as all the public safety departments around the county in preparation for election day. And then let's see, on Tuesday evening, council met, and it was a fairly long meeting. Went past 1 a.m. again, and we didn't get to all the topics that we'd hoped to for a second meeting in a row, which normally doesn't happen, but especially as you get closer to the end of the year, things conceivably back up, and it was good to have a lot of people out there talking and giving input on different items that we had on our agenda. And as far as what we approved Tuesday night, one important thing that we approved was we accepted the donation from Google for infrastructure for bikes and pedestrian facility improvements along Manila Drive and West Moffett Park Drive. So with the Moffett 101-237 interchange improvements, part of that was made into a cycle track for bikes, and then there were improvements for bike and pedestrian kind of east of Moffett Park Drive, or east of Matilda along Moffett Park Drive, and partially west of Moffett Park Drive, west along Moffett Park Drive as you're going south of Moffett Towers and such. That being said, what Google wants to do is improve that entire stretch between Matilda and going all the way to, I think, ultimately Ellis, and then conceivably all the way to Moffett Field or Moffett Drive. And so from that standpoint, it's positive for any commuter, any bike, any person that likes to bike or walk through that area. And so it was accepting their 2.5 million dollar estimated construction costs. And I think that was positive. It's good to see Google, giving back. And I think, they're one of the better tech firms that continue to support the local community. We spent a lot of time on our reach codes, and we've been talking about reach codes now for almost 2 years, it seems like. And what reach codes are basically changing our building codes and kind of our ordinances within the city to require a higher standard from an environmental standpoint. And so, we've had lots of discussions. This went through several commissions: our planning commission, our sustainability commission, on what the residential and non-residential construction project codes should be. And after a lot of public input and a lot of and what I was really happy that staff had incorporated a lot of the changes that the different commissions had proposed. And then from a council standpoint, we did a lot of discussion on how much farther we would like to go. And we went a lot farther than what staff had been proposing. And so a lot of the discussions had to do with EV charger requirements for construction. And that kind of applied to hotels, office space, multifamily, and single family. But most importantly, it was adding the appropriate conduit to basically make every space an EV charger, provide EV chargers throughout the parking areas for especially hotels and office space, multifamily. And I think that's important, is if you lay the conduit early, it's not requiring all of them. And although that was part of it, is requiring a certain percentage of chargers to be added. But most importantly, it was making sure that anything that's built has the appropriate infrastructure, so that as we get more and more percentages of EVs in our community, those businesses, those apartment buildings have conduit ready, that immediately they can add EV chargers without tearing up, basically tearing up the building, tearing up the parking structure, tearing up the whole bunch of the service level parking in order to add EV chargers. So from that standpoint, I think it was very positive. This is one of the things that Whole Foods opened up this past week, and one of the things that happened last week was they opened up the old J.C. Penney's parking structure, and there was a lot of effort to add EV chargers. So there's EV chargers per floor for that, but there was a lot of effort to make sure that to add that wiring, to figure out where they could actually put that in within the building, because when it was built 35 years ago, there was lighting, and that was pretty much it. And so lighting, a elevator, and now it was like, okay, how do we add EV chargers throughout this building? And I think that was very good of City Line to make sure that every floor has EV chargers, and making sure that was an appropriate infrastructure as we have more and more residents and business people, employees that are driving EVs, and having that basically ubiquitous throughout the community. If that's everywhere that people go, it makes it much easier for them to charge. It also makes it easier for them not to have that worry about how many more miles do I have with my EV. So from that standpoint, definitely it's a positive sort of thing. And then other things we did was require all electric homes and buildings for construction, and then commercial kitchens, basically trying to make sure that they're all electric as much as possible. There is a process for exemptions, but they do have to go through some sort of process to deal with if they want gas, how they get it. And so that was a lot of time spent on that. I think that took us almost 2.5, 3 hours between public comment questions of staff, and then a large discussion amongst council on how far we would like to go with the different measures. And so I think ultimately the final motion and the final levels of requirements were actually very positive. We also approved the bid for the Civic Center Phase 1. And so we've been talking about the Civic Center modernization project now for long before I got on council. But ultimately it's a new city hall which really relocates staff from multiple different buildings. So it's like from the trailers, from the what I'll call the rabbit hutches across the street on the north side of Olive to and then dealing with the current city hall, getting rid of the annex, and having where ultimately we've had staff that have had to double up in cubicles. So it's getting rid of all that and building a new city hall that's LEED platinum, that is net zero energy. I think that's critical in the long term from the city. It also did an addition onto the public safety building for our emergency operations center and our detectives bureau. So that was a good, that was part of that. And then it was renovation of the public safety building to support certain current operational needs and technology functions that aren't there. And then it's ultimately, after that has been built, it's the demolition of the existing city hall, the city hall annex, the south annex, basically trailers, and of course the Sunnyvale office center on the north side of Olive. And it's then a creation of about 6 acres of open space and parks and plazas. So I think that will ultimately be really good for people that are going to the library, people that are going to City Hall. It'll be a much more active center. It keeps the Charles Street Garden, so that was a critical thing also. And ultimately from a design standpoint, it'll be a pretty interesting design. And I think the big thing is it's more environmentally friendly for in the long run for the city. Okay, and so that was that basically approved that bid, and that bid was the qualified bid was about $50 million less than what we'd initially expected. So as opposed to about 225 million, it was about 170 million. And so this is a great time to be building. From a construction side standpoint, construction has started to taper off, and so getting that bid at this point, we can get a lot more done. And from an estimate standpoint, we were able to do that for about the 50 million less than what we expected, which is really positive. So we moved forward with that and basically gave approved the bid, approved the city manager to deal with any other issues, and then of course this will kick off the actual groundbreaking, which should be happening, we're guessing, about the beginning of December. So we're quickly moving forward with getting that done. And during the downturn, we've actually been getting like our Washington Park Swim Center, that's on track, and we've actually seen that we've been able to get better subcontractors than what we might normally get, just because there isn't as much construction going on right now. So it's a positive thing from a city standpoint. And then the other thing that we did was introduce an ordinance to basically prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products within the city of Sunnyvale. And I co-sponsored this study issue back in June of 2018, and it was approved by council in 2019. And so just as a background, tobacco in general is, smoking is really bad. 1 in 8 deaths, and still, considering that we don't have as much smoking here, 1 in 8 deaths in Santa Clara County is due to smoking in some way. And one in ten Santa Clara youth use tobacco, including e-cigarettes. And so, regarding e-cigarettes, there's been about a 78% increase in Santa Clara County in high school use, and one in three teens report that they have tried e-cigarettes. So tobacco remains the number one preventable cause of death and disease. And council uh, kicked off the study issue just over about a year and a half ago. It was supposed to wrap up in the spring. Of course, COVID happened, and that of course caused everything to be delayed. But it finally came back to us, and council approved an implementation of a new ordinance which prohibited the sale of all flavored products, including hookah and premium cigars and loose leaf tobacco. And this will apply to all tobacco retailers. And I was actually surprised that we have about 60 in Sunnyvale, although they will have about 6 months to deplete the stock in the meantime. So they have about 6 months to stop selling flavored tobacco while after this ordinance goes into effect. So the ordinance goes into effect in about 2 weeks, and then and that starts the clock for 6 months for them to completely stop selling. And we didn't get to the budget update yet again. So that will be in the next meeting. And then the other thing that we were going to go through was the art master plan, which I talked about last week. That has a lot of good things as far as increasing the percentage for office space that is applied to art that needs to be done. That'll move that from 1 to 1.5%, and also create, approving the art master plan will also create a program for painting utility boxes. So art spread throughout the community, and setting aside about $50,000 for that program. So from my standpoint, I think we'll hopefully get to that at the next meeting. The next agenda isn't as full, so hopefully that will go not until 1 a.m. and we'll be able to move that forward. And then on Wednesday, Governor Newsom had a press conference, and he gave another fire season update. Definitely, we're at high risk, but most of the fires have been contained. Although there have been about 42 fires just in the last few weeks. A lot of them you don't hear about in the last week, and a lot of them you don't hear about. But a lot of time was spent, of course, on COVID, and so cases are trending up. If you look at the 14-day average, and if you look at the 7-day average, the state is watching that very, very closely. And one of the things that the governor went through, is we need to be very careful. We need to maintain our good practices with Halloween coming, with Thanksgiving coming. We need to do whatever we can to try to maintain those good practices of wearing your mask, of washing your hands, of being safe as much as possible when you're out. But he also went through kind of what's happening with the vaccines. And so one of the things that the state has done is submit a comprehensive plan for distribution. And he's been working with all the West Coast governors on what the best practices are. And so working with Oregon, working with Washington, working with other governors, and trying to figure out what policies we'll put in place, and trying to make sure that when a vaccine is ready, we have best practices on first who gets the vaccine, and then reminding them that within 20 days they need to get the second dosage of that vaccine. And so that's important, and then also creating a scientific safety review committees to make sure that the vaccine is being stored correctly. This is part of it. Some of the vaccines, the two, one of them has to be kept very cold until being administered. So that is also part of this issue, as far as making sure that we're doing whatever we can that we're not wasting any vaccine also. So putting that in place, and we were, according to the governor, had the most comprehensive uh, plan that was submitted to the federal government, and so hopefully we are first in line as far as ready to get those vaccine doses when they become available for our healthcare workers, for our frontline workers. Yes, and then yesterday it was a really important day. Whole Foods had their grand opening, and from a city standpoint, we've been waiting for that downtown market for many, many years. When in the '60s, when the downtown, the old downtown, which we'll call the city hall, other stores, was torn down to make way for the mall of the future. Um, there used to be a market right downtown. The mall was there through the '70s, '80s. Finally, in the '90s, went bankrupt. And part of the vision, and that's one of the reasons why I got involved with the city, is when we talked about the vision for a new downtown, and that's what got me involved with attending council meetings and planning commission meetings. Part of that was a market, a movie theater, and from that standpoint, that Whole Foods, and we didn't know what market would finally be there, but it ended up being a Whole Foods. I had their grand opening yesterday, and so they gave a tour. There wasn't any big ribbon cutting event. They gave a tour for council members and city staff on Wednesday. They were still doing the last stocking of their shelves. I went by for a little bit yesterday, and it's pretty amazing. It looks really good inside. It's about 60,000 square feet. There's a brew pub. There's a lot of takeaway food, pizza and Indian food and seafood. So there's a lot of what the buffet bar isn't what it used to be, of course, with under COVID. That being said, they have a lot of takeaway lunches, meals that you can do, and then just the quality, the variety of local, and they focused on local distributors also. So local meats, local foods that are being provided, and then just it's a really nice feel. Brand new stores is really good. And then actually they had gift bags for for customers that with the design made by two students from Sunnyvale Middle School. So it was actually very good from that standpoint. They also gave a donation to Sunnyvale Community Services. So they're already giving back to the community. I think they'll be a good community partner as we move forward. So I was happy to see that open up after so many years. As that we've been looking for that. So I've heard a lot of good things already from residents who've been able to attend. They have senior hours Friday mornings from 7 to 8 a.m. They're normally open from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. I think is their normal hours. But so from that standpoint, I ran by this morning and saw several people taking advantage of those senior hours. So the word is already getting out within our community. And then on Thursday, so yeah, another thing that happened yesterday is Governor Newsom signed several executive orders, but probably the one that applies to most people was allowing people over 70 years old to renew their driver's license by mail. In order to make sure that they don't have to do live transactions at the DMV, and that is for their protection. Conceivably, the older, most vulnerable residents can stay home and still get their license renewed at least again. And this is an extension of an executive order that happened earlier this year. While we're still under COVID, it's making sure that people don't have to go out if they don't really need to. And so let me go ahead and announce some upcoming events. And there's a lot of things happening. It's a busy time of the year. The other big news, so Whole Foods opened yesterday. The other big news is AMC. So AMC Theater opens this evening. So their first shows are at 5:30 p.m. and we talked about this previously under the current county health order. Theaters were allowed to open, but they aren't allowed to provide concessions. And so usually, and so AMC, in talking to their management a few weeks ago, they weren't ready to open because it's so critical from that standpoint to have concessions. They make a lot of money, and this one, our AMC theater was actually very very important because it actually had not just standard snacks, but it was going to have dining, at your seat, and then conceivably also they have that big open area that looks across onto Redwood Square, and so it was going to be a dining area on the second floor of the AMC Whole Foods building. So, but the county health order said no concessions. That being said, AMC earlier this week decided that they would open around the country, around the state, um, regardless of whether or not they could sell concessions. And that's mainly to show, for one thing, it shows to the county health officers that they have good procedures in place, that they have good health procedures in place. For one thing, to distribute people in the theaters, and that's one of the things that you can reserve your seat online, and immediately the seat on both sides of you is taken up. And so that's one of the things that they have done, is making sure that there's appropriate spreading out of the clientele within the theater, and then right now having appropriate plastic barriers for any of the ticket takers, all those sorts of things to make sure that you feel safe. So that's a big step forward. The if you want to, you can go online right now and get your tickets. I might actually be going tonight, depending upon how busy today goes, for to enjoy that. I think it's a big step forward to have both the market and the theater open, and that's a very positive thing, and especially those being anchor tenants, that also brings in a certain amount of new retail, new restaurants along McKinley, along Francis, along Washington, that are waiting to that haven't signed, or puts the pressure on them that much more to try to open as quickly as possible. And I hear that there are going to be certain stores that will be opening in the next month, before Christmas, and so that's very positive from that standpoint. Lots of construction going on along the first floor, along McKinley Avenue and Francis, trying to make sure that those stores are ready to open. And then tomorrow, it's election season, so tomorrow is my last market with the mayor prior to election day. So election day is Tuesday. Drop by for a yard sign, for a campaign button, pick up some literature. If you have a question, definitely come by. It's been good to talk to people again. I really miss that social interaction that normally would happen during these office hours, and at an actual coffee shop. But please remember to get the word out. Hopefully, visit larryformayor.com. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors to go there, sign up, learn more about me, about my platform. You can walk a district, deliver flyers if you want, but just getting the word out to your friends, to your neighbors, about the job I've done as mayor, as well as trying to make sure that our residents feel protected, our businesses feel supported. That's been my goal for the last 4 years. And then it's also just having great ideas and doing good within your community. That's one of the things that people are always surprised about, that it's like, oh, they think the mayor is a full-time job. No, it's not. I wish it was a full-time job. If you're in San Francisco, if you're in San Jose, definitely it's a full-time job with full-time pay and full-time staff. If you're in all the other cities around the peninsula and the South Bay here, and the majority of the Bay Area, it's a part-time job. Being on council, being mayor is a part-time job, with conceivably one staff member. We have one staff member that supports all council as well as other things within, answering the emails and everything else. But it's you do it because you love your city. You get reward and you get reward out of helping people, and that to me has been, the best part of the last over almost 4.5 years now on council. As far as, helping out people, getting ideas like the pet parade restarted, making sure that if people have issues in their community, getting them, helping them work together to solve those issues, or just how they, figure out how to tell city staff that there's a problem like a cracked sidewalk or a street light that's out. So, from my standpoint, it's been a lot of fun. And then, of course, the Sunnyvale Pet Parade, which I just talked about. Tomorrow is Halloween, and we'll talk about one of the questions that I just saw. So the Sunnyvale Pet Parade has gone virtual. So over the last few weeks, people have been submitting photos of their pets, photos of their families dressed up for Halloween. And so you can go to sunnyvalepetparade.com to learn more information. But that video will be released at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And so it's a family costume pet parade or service organization event. So hopefully you will be able to watch that or watch it anytime over the next week. It's not necessarily it's a Halloween event, but not necessarily has to be for Halloween. Let's go ahead and get to the health dashboard on testing, on what's been happening at a state level and a county level. From a state level standpoint, we've now had about 927,000 cases and about 17,500 deaths. So, we're still having, more and more cases, and things continue to trend upward from a state standpoint, especially, but also trending slightly upward in the last week from a county standpoint. So, please do what you can to prevent the spread. From a county standpoint, we've had 24,665 cases. That's up about 1,000 cases from last week, and we've had 404 deaths in the county due to COVID. So, and that's increased 19 from last week. We have still about 85 hospitalizations within the county, which is about the same as where we've stayed for the last few weeks. And then from a city standpoint, San Jose still has the most cases. They've had 16,268 cases, up 650 from last week. So that's ticking upwards from 450, 550, 500 for the last few weeks. So they've had about an extra 100 cases. And then from a Sunnyvale standpoint, we've had 1,078 cases. That's up 30 from last week. So we've had about 20 or 30 for the last few weeks. So we're fairly stable from a city standpoint. I continue to do lots of advocating on your behalf. I have my weekly calls with the county supervisors, county health, talking to our state and federal representatives. From a county standpoint, the mobile county health pop-up van was back here in Murphy Park this past Monday. It will be back in about 2 weeks. So it's here on the second and fourth Mondays going forward. So they were here last Monday, and I heard from multiple people that they got tested. And if you need to get tested in Sunnyvale or any of the other locations, you can go to sccfreetest.org to find out more information. They'll be back on November 9th. And then also El Camino Hospital is doing testing in downtown Sunnyvale on November 10th from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And to schedule something, you can go to elcaminohealth.org and search for Sunnyvale downtown, or you can call 650-940-7022. And tests are basically for anyone who lives in the El Camino Health District or works or goes to school in that district. So that includes a large portion of Sunnyvale, but you can contact El Camino Health for eligibility. So let's go ahead and go to questions for the week. And the question I did get was, when is AMC opening? Which I've already answered. It is opening tonight. So shows start at 5:30, and there will be no concessions, but you can go ahead and reserve online and see. I had a tour of AMC back at the beginning of March, so long ago right now, when they were expecting to open at the end of March. So about just after COVID, the shelter in place started. That's when they were planning to open, and of course they've had to hold that off now for 7 months, 8 months, and at least they're finally opening. You can reserve. They have all kinds of procedures in place as far as cleaning the theater after every showing, as well as things that they put on as far as filtration systems and plastic barriers to make sure that people aren't are reducing as much as possible people that they're coming in contact with. Let's see, other questions. And we got this again. Will Murphy Avenue be closed after COVID-19, and it will continue to be a pedestrian only zone? Hopefully, yes. The Sunnyvale Downtown Association Board is talking about it. Definitely keep telling your businesses that you like it. That to me is critical. As long as they keep hearing that this is what the residents want. This is why whenever it would come up in the past, the businesses basically said no because they thought that they were going to lose too many customers. But if people want it, they will continue it. Other questions: is voting safe? I'm worried about the elections. So as of Monday, about 7.8 million Californians had already cast mail-in ballots or drop-off ballots, and that's about 34% of the total issued. So we've already, about a third of the people, more than a third of the people have already voted. And if you need to find out where you can vote, where your voting centers are, if you have questions about ballot drop-off boxes, you can go to sccvote.org and you can drop off your ballots or go to any voting center within the county. And because the Voters' Choice Act, everyone received a mail-in ballot. Tomorrow, for the next 4 days, vote centers will be open, and there'll be 7 of them in Sunnyvale that open tomorrow, and they'll be open from, I think, 8 to 4:30, 8 to 5 every day. But it'll be at Washington Park, Braley Park, Fair Oaks Park, the Sunnyvale Community Center, Sunnyvale Middle School, Columbia Middle School, and Cupertino Middle School. So you have 7 different locations where you'll be able to turn your ballot. You'll be able to get a replacement ballot if you made a mistake or had a problem, if you didn't receive yours in the mail, or if you're not registered to vote, if you know somebody who is qualified to register to vote, is a citizen, lives here in Sunnyvale, they can go there and actually get registered to vote and a provisional ballot all at the same time. So that's really important. If you want to drop off your ballot, as I've said previously, you can go to the library, you can go to the City Hall Annex, you can go to the Valley Medical in Fair Oaks, the Sunnyvale Community Center, and Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church on Fremont Avenue if you want to turn in your ballot today. So voting by mail is safe, and then if you are voting by mail, you still have, as long as it's postmarked on or by November 3rd, the county registrar will continue to accept those for up to 17 days. And let's see, what is happening? Is Halloween happening in Sunnyvale? Well, the normal Halloween is not happening. From that standpoint, it's it's critical that and the county health department issued guidelines for Halloween, but basically it's staying at home as much as possible. You know, for Halloween and Dia de los Muertos, you know, the low or moderate risk is critical. So I know that you know you can stay at home, you can share photos of your family dressed up with neighbors. You can dress up your house, you decorate pumpkins or your front porch or your house, and then conceivably vehicle based gatherings or parades throughout the city to see the decorations in the evening, making sure that you are staying safe, that you are, you know, providing safe social distancing. I've heard of a few neighbors that are doing kind of pumpkin carving contests in their backyards. So different families at different tables carving out their pumpkins and then showing what they're doing, decorating the pumpkins. And then conceivably, I've heard of a few that are doing, let's say, uh, a few families getting together and having uh, candy discovery like pumpkin eggs or something of that nature throughout their yards, but not a normal handing out candy. So from that standpoint, it's we need to make sure that everyone is safe, safe socially distanced, and making sure that as much as possible, you are doing what you can to stop the spread of the virus. So that's important. Um, let's see other questions that I got. What can I do for your campaign? Well, I appreciate everybody who's helped out, who's walked precincts for me, who's forwarded emails to other people, to their friends or neighbors. I think that's been good. Being on some Zoom meetings and talking to neighbors or social groups about how to get out the vote, how why they should vote for me, as well as uh, finding out more about my campaign, finding out more about me, getting the word out, especially at this point, is critical. Help out on the campaign. So you can go to larryformayor.com if you want. If you still want to get the word out, that's it. We still have 4 more days until election day, and so whatever you can do, I appreciate it. It's been an interesting campaign to say the least. It's been not been a normal campaign where it would be how many doors did you knock on, how many people did you talk to. I have been able to talk to a good number of people when I've been walking precincts, and they've been out on their working on their yard, or have been at the front door when dropping off and talking to them. And I have been it's been very positive from that standpoint to hear feedback and connect with people. That's what I miss most about precinct walking, is connecting with people, hearing their concerns and talking to them. And then that actually been one of the positive things about the market is being able to talk to people. Everybody masked, everybody safe, socially distanced, but being able to hear their concerns, or just hear their positive messages, or how these these video live streams have actually helped them make it through the shelter in place. So to me, that's been very positive, and I miss that, as far as what's happened, as far as from a city standpoint. Walking precincts in an election, that to me was always critical. So who knows how this will how this election season will go, but we're almost done. Finally, Tuesday is right around the corner. Can you address the traffic on El Camino Real caused by Chick-fil-A? Is there a plan to resolve the issue? So currently there is no plan. This was approved uh, prior to my time getting on council or getting on planning commission, and this is an ongoing issue where staff is continuing to monitor and all that. However, this was approved. The drive-through is part of that project and was approved early on. There isn't an ongoing, once it's been permitted. The problem is, how do you resolve that? We are trying to look at other ways to resolve that, to make sure that people are, um, basically can pick up their food as quickly as possible, not to deal with drive-through. And so we have continued to work with them on that. But uh, let's see. But definitely, it's an ongoing issue. Uh, that being said, they have been permitted and approved and are open. And so once they've been permitted, you can't go back and say and met all the requirements that were there. You can't go back and say, oh, you need to fix this. And so that's one of the things that I wish previous planning commissions council had um, put more restrictions or more effects. I definitely know that anything new approved along El Camino that has a drive-through like that will be most likely looked at quite a bit closer by staff, just because of kind of the issues of being successful. And that's one of the things that is being evaluated is, if it's successful, how do you deal with parking? How do you deal with drive-through issues? And drive-throughs are a common problem because people line up as opposed to parking and immediately finding parking. Let's see. Yeah, and so somebody comment, best not to vote by mail, better to drop off. Absolutely. That is the preferred way, especially at this point, so close to election day, so that make sure that your ballot is not lost in the mail. But some people will still vote by mail. Mr. Mayor, are you nervous about the election? How confident are you about being reelected? Am I nervous about the election? At this point, it's been a crazy time to be mayor, having a full-time job, and also running a campaign. From my standpoint, I'm happy that we'll get to election day and I can at least remove one of my different jobs, one of the different hats that I wear. From that standpoint, how confident I am. Hopefully, it's like I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from either on social media, from people that are calling on a daily basis saying that they voted for me, or they know their friends are voting for me, from emails. So from that standpoint, I'm fairly positive. But you really don't know who shows up and votes. So, and Sunnyvale doesn't really have polling. So from that standpoint, it's mailers, it's door drops, it's people like you that tell your neighbors who to vote for. This is the best candidate. It's taking a lawn sign and publicly declaring that Larry Klein is the best candidate for mayor. And so all those things help, but you don't know who shows up on a specific election day. Hopefully that we get more people out. And from that standpoint, all the people that I've helped at office hours like these for the last 4 years, remember that and remember what I've done for our community. But who knows? It's like we've had, I can't. I tried to guess last 4 years ago and chose several races wrong. So from that standpoint, it's hard to basically be the bookie and figure out who's going to win a specific election. And let's see. From that standpoint, we're right at 10 o'clock. So let's go ahead and wrap up from that standpoint. Thanks for again joining me this week. It's crazy times, with so much going on, and between being mayor and running a campaign and having a day job. But thanks for joining me again this week. And as always, I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to this pandemic. I know it continues to be difficult for so many. New issues come up every week, but your response makes a difference. Helping your neighbors, making and sharing masks, mowing your neighbor's lawn, sharing baked goods and fruit you picked, writing positive chalk messages, putting positive messages, on your front lawn, in the windows. I see them and have thanked multiple people for that. Continue to build our community and help others during these times. I'm proud to see Sunnyvale residents pulling together and helping their neighbors, helping strangers. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hello from a safe social distance. People miss that social interaction. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we'll get through this together. Have a safe Halloween. Have a safe Dia de los Muertos. Thanks for listening, and until next week, stay safe, and of course, wear your mask. Take care. Goodbye.